The Bronze Venus, the Black Pearl, the Creole Goddess. In her adopted country of France, she was known simply as La Baker. As a chubby toddler, her family dubbed her Tumpy because they thought she looked like Humpty Dumpty. And though today the amazing story of entertainer Josephine Baker belongs to the world, it is also a story that can't be fully told without understanding her roots in St. Louis. And though as a young girl she was eager to leave the city and its racial prejudices, she never lost touch with the hometown that was instrumental in setting her on her course to international stardom. And though St. Louis offered her little in her youth, it has since come to embrace her. In 2006, the centennial of her birth, she was honored by an exhibit at the Sheldon Art Gallery, Josephine Baker, Image and Icon. And in 2008, the town turned out again at the Sheldon Concert Hall to honor her for the release of a Josephine Baker U.S. postage stamp as part of its series acknowledging black cinema stars.
I would say she was a real St. Louis woman. When I was approached about the unveiling of the stamp, I thought how much fun this is going to be, and I said to the post office, let's make an event out of it.
It was an event Baker herself would have appreciated, bringing together representatives of the Postal Service, local dignitaries, fans, members of her family, and dancers from COCA, the Center of Creative Arts. It was a tribute to a hometown girl made good and to the principles that shaped her life: dedication to freedom and equality, and resistance to the social forces she battled her entire life.
This is a moment in time that will not come again.
Right, baby.
This is a legacy she's left behind, is that no matter what nationality you are, listen, we are all people, we are all created in God's image, and we have a right to equal access and a right to equal opportunity.
Frida Josephine Baker grew up in the old Mill Creek neighborhood just south of Union Station. By the time she was 11 years old, she was singing and dancing in the streets here, and when she was 15, she joined a vaudeville troupe. There's not much of the old neighborhood left today. Most of it was torn down in the late 50s and early 60s as part of a city slum clearance program. And although Mill Creek was predominantly an African-American neighborhood, there was a strong presence of other cultural and ethnic groups, which played a major role in shaping the woman she would eventually become.
It was diverse. We heard people speak Spanish, they speak Yiddish, we heard speak French, all in that area. It was a wonderful area, and that's exactly the type of environment Josephine Baker had.
But growing up in St. Louis shaped her in other ways as well. Witnessing the 1917 East St. Louis race riot left a lifelong impression on her.
It was basically white people massacring black people. I mean, there were at least 39 black people were murdered. And much of downtown East St. Louis was set on fire. And people on this side, thousands of people on this side of the river, flocked to the riverbanks to watch these people, hundreds and hundreds of people, fleeing across the two main bridges in those days, Eads Bridge and the Free Bridge. And Josephine Baker was one of those people. She was 11 years old, and she saw this great plume of smoke rising from across the river, and it was like a hand in the sky. And it affected her so strongly that she never forgot it for the rest of her life. It was very instrumental in driving her to leave this country, not just to leave St. Louis, but to leave America.
Baker left St. Louis, eventually performing in New York at the time of the Harlem Renaissance, where she sang and danced at the Plantation Club and on Broadway. In 1925, she moved to Paris. As the star of La Revue Negre in a costume consisting of little more than a skirt of artificial bananas, she shocked and delighted audiences with her danse sauvage and became an international sensation.
She made the bananas move like her body. I thought it was fast. The family loved it. We thought, that's Joseph and Tumpy doing a crazy thing. It was nothing unusual.
But Baker took her career far beyond that of erotic dance. Decades before there would be a Cher or a Madonna, she understood the power of constantly reinventing herself, A violinist had a violin, a painter his palette, she said. All I had was myself. I was the instrument that I must care for. Rather than being a victim of race and gender, she transcended stereotypes and experimented with her image. She found in France acceptance that she never enjoyed in the States. In 1927, she began her long film career starring in movies that highlighted her extraordinary talents. Many of her films were based on variations of the story of a poor girl who, through grit and talent, achieved success. In 1937, she became a French citizen.
Ein Blick auf den Eiffelturm. Links vom Führer Professor Speer.
When her beloved Paris was occupied by the Nazis, she worked with the resistance, risking her life to deliver messages hidden among her sheet music. After the war, she received France's highest military honor, the Croix de Guerre. The hard lessons she learned from racism drove her throughout her life. After the war, she adopted 12 children from different racial and ethnic groups, calling them her Rainbow Tribe. Before there was a civil rights movement in the 1960s, Baker was an outspoken advocate for racial equality. In 1952, she returned to St. Louis to perform, donating her services to the city schools, but not until she was assured that the audience would not be segregated. For Baker, it was an emotional homecoming.
And she spoke at the Old Kiel Auditorium to 6,000 people. She modeled the latest Paris fashions and sang and danced. And then she spoke very eloquently, and the audience was mixed. And she said, I get tears in my eyes when I look out at what she called a salt and pepper audience. When I see blacks and whites together, she said, I get tears in my eyes. And she talked about the terrible effect the race riot had had on her as a child and how it had stayed with her her whole life. And she also said that she had finally decided, after she had tried to escape this memory and couldn't by getting away from the United States, she had finally decided to come back and fight racial prejudice in this country.
In 1963, she spoke at the March on Washington, standing beside Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Following Dr. King's assassination, his widow asked her to take her husband's place as leader of the civil rights movement. She declined, saying her children were too young to lose their mother. Josephine Baker died in Paris in 1975 while starring in a retrospective review celebrating the anniversary of her first opening in France. She received a state funeral. Today, her legacy continues, an inspiration to a new generation.
I love Josephine. I love her. I'm always compared to her. She had a successful career, and if it wasn't for her, there might not have been my opportunity as a dancer living in New York, and I'm dancing now. It's my career. I wouldn't have it any other way.
For much of her life, it would have been inconceivable that the image of Josephine Baker would appear on a postage stamp, or that the city of her birth would ever take such pride in her accomplishments. But the salt and pepper crowd that gathered at the Sheldon is testament that over time we may listen to the voices of our better angels.
Laissez de là, qui s'ennuyait seul ici-bas, et j'ai voulu qu'il soit choyé dans un foyer.